and encouraging Christians to reclaim their responsibility of discipling their children through education. Pastors have said that there's no strong voice advising them on education. Well, CEI is now that strong voice. So join us as we put action to the Great Commission, because education is discipleship. Here's your host.
Hey, I'm your host today, Ray Moore, and I'm so glad to be here. And as we've mentioned before, we're kind of starting a new series since the coronavirus has shut down public education and really all schooling. We now have 50 million or more children in the U.S. that are being homeschooled. Now, they're not maybe using a Christian curriculum, but they are home with their families and they're being taught at home. So we're happy about that, even though we're sad about the medical issues that so many people are facing. But there's a silver lining in this dark cloud, and so we're having special programs featuring leaders and personalities and organizations that have been in this fight to grow, expand, and increase the kingdom of God through growing private Christian education and homeschooling for many, many years. And of course, I'm one of those people. We've been at it with the Exodus Mandate now over 23 years. And I've got a friend that's going to be on today. He's been a good friend for about 15 years. And I can't quite remember how we first met, but I think it's been 15 years or so. He was in my home speaking and has a project or a mission or organization that he is created and works with, and we're going to let him tell you about it. But I was so amazed at it and impressed, and really going back 15 years or more, this is one of the really bright spots in the nation in growing homeschooling and Christian schooling. But he has a kind of a unique twist, and my friend today is Paul Dorr. It's spelled D-O-R-R. Do I see Paul on the camera? I think my screen is not there for some reason.
Yeah, am I up?
Okay. I'm not seeing him, Jared. What do I do? Okay. Okay, well, that's real simple. I should have learned that by now. Here's my good friend Paul Dorr, and Paul has a ministry, or actually it's a consulting service, campaign consulting service called Rollback Local Gov, and that gov means government, rollbacklocalgov.com. And this is a program that we've known about since about 2005, I think. Can't quite remember when he was speaking to a group in my home for the first time and he laid out his plan, his agenda. So we're going to talk about this now and how he has worked on basically defeating school bond levies and referendum for over 15 years, is it, Paul?
Somewhere around there. I just remembered as you were talking how we first connected. One of your board members heard about some of my work where I was critiquing some of the poor leadership in the homeschool movement, praising what was happening in the growth of homeschooling, but the leadership was kind of going a different direction. He called me up and tried to convince me that, I should kind of moderate that a little bit. And 2.5 hours later, he realized what all my agenda was, all I was doing. And he said, no, don't back off. Keep doing what you're doing. Then he turned around, he called you and said, you got to talk to this guy. And that was back in the early 2000s or thereabouts. So anyway. Yeah.
That's right. I do remember that now. Sometimes we're meeting so many new warriors, and the battle is fluid. The battlefield is fluid. We're in combat. A lot of Christians don't know that we're at war and combat, but Paul and I know.
I'm a believer in Christ with all my heart and all my soul. My wife is. We have been since we were children. We love the gospel. We love the gifts of grace that God's given us. And but years back, we got involved in the pro-life movement, and from there we started looking at education. And I was raised on an Iowa farm. My wife was. We were both university trained, and then I got into banking, and I got to see the money system from within, and that's where I really started to have my eyes opened up. I used to own half of a community bank, and then after I sold in the mid '80s, I got into the whole bank consulting work throughout the upper Midwest, and I got to recognize the immorality of our money system. And when I started tying that to pro-life and education, I started seeing some commonalities to all this, and recognize that bond dealers, money systems, the taxation process that buries Christian families to paying for something that they're opposed to, often, in fact, some Southern theologians in the late 18th century or 19th century warned that the longer this property tax goes on, the more the Christians are going to be drawn out of Christ-centered education into the public schools. And so I started looking at all this.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 2001, I think it was. I got contacted by some property owners about this bond issues come up in the school, and I decided to go ahead and take a look at it. And I was trained in finance. I was trained in financial consulting, and so I had time to look at the balance sheets of the school district, and I started seeing some trends that were really disturbing. And so with that, I put together an ad campaign for them. I helped them inform the public how wasteful this was, and we defeated the levy. That opened the door, and I now have done about 90 of these campaigns in 9 states, upper Midwest primarily, but I've also been in South Carolina, I've been in Texas, and other states around, and we've rolled back probably $3 billion. The last I looked, $3 billion worth of property taxes and levies going to public schools. And along the way, I got to understand the very nature of our government system from within it, and got to deal with the money people, the lawyers, the administrators. I became deeply convinced of how rotten the whole system is from the inside out. And so I've done, like I say, probably 90 of these campaigns, and there's over $3 billion in property taxes saved. The interesting part is that it's to the point now that school administrators associations, school board associations, the upper Midwest, they hold workshops for the annual conventions for administrators as to what to do when I show up.
Right. Well, we had him show up in South Carolina, I think, for the first time in 2010. I have to tell that story because I was ready to link. We knew a family over in Aiken, South Carolina, which is my hometown. Actually, I haven't lived there since I got married in 1969, and it was Debbie and Harry Nix, and they're small business owners, and very successful in business. And there was a $360 million bond referendum in Aiken
with the interest over the life of the bonds. It was
pretty big deal, and nobody was against it. The Democratic Party all was for it, the Chamber of Commerce, a lot of the churches, the mayors. There was not one living soul in Aiken County that was opposed to it. So supposedly, but there was one little Christian woman named Debbie Nix, and she was very agitated that this was not morally right. And she put an ad in the local paper, and it was something like this: "I am a Christian woman, and if you're opposed to this school bond levy, meet me on the courthouse steps on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. And about 40 or 50 people showed up, Paul. It was huge.
Yeah, at least that. Yep.
Yeah. And it shocked her. And so I don't know how I got in touch with her, but I contacted her and said, look, do you really want to fight this and win, or you just want to fight it and lose? Because they always seem to have the upper hand. So she said, we want to win. So they brought Paul in, and he helped them organize and helped them plan their strategy, explain the messaging and the narrative. That's where we usually lose, is on the messaging. And they fought it and beat them 69 to 31%. Nobody could believe it. And I think the other side only won a few precincts. But you fill me in from there, Paul, and how that went.
And that is where we got started. And I've been blessed to become friends with the Nixes, and they have employed me to help them in several fights at the local government level over the years. What God has opened my eyes to see in these fights is, let me give an illustration. what a dear friend over in Illinois told me about 2012, because there's something critical about stopping government education funding. And that is that they have, as Stephen Baskerville says in his book on Taken into Custody, they've co-opted children as the political leverage for all kinds of growth in government, particularly the public schools. And so I train people on how to offset the message of children. And to give an illustration, back to my friend in Illinois, in 2010, there was a sweeping through St. Louis, Missouri, right? My friend's right across the river in Illinois. In St. Louis, there's a sweeping out of big spending, liberal, often Democrat city council members, county commissioners, school board members, and all these Republican voters turned out and threw all these people out of office. But those same voters at that same election night had 9 various school bond issues on the ballots all over the metro St. Louis area, 9 of them. And all 9 of those passed. The same voters who threw out all the big spending liberal elected office holders also approved the school bonds. And you ask yourself, why? And it's because of the guilt trip about the children. They always invoke the children in these fights. And
my audience, this is a very important point you're getting ready to hear. And if you get your mind around this, you won't be tricked by the liberal educators anymore.
Because this concept is what opened up my whole business. Because it's hard for successful business people, Christians and successful business people, to wrap their head around this. I have to sometimes sit down with engineers and build property developers and doctors and different people and say, well, just show how they're wasting the money. Just spell out the tremendous waste in these buildings and so forth. And people will understand. And I've told them, I said, the most successful business people make the most miserable political activists, because you think like a successful business person. Maximize revenue, minimize expenses, provide a good product and a service, and you'll make money. Government doesn't think that way, and you cannot go into the marketplace, in the political marketplace, and present that idea to the voters. They're going to say, because the school's going to say, well, we know there's been a little bit of waste, but it's for the children. You know, and your parents before you sacrificed, and they fought for the children. And isn't it time that you benefited from this? Isn't it time you help the children? And so we had to think that through with an honest response. And we now, when we go to these communities, we spell out to the community how the school is profligate in the spending. They're wasteful at every level. Look at the buildings, look at the model, look at everything they have, look at the car parking lots, look at the general payroll. The whole public education system is a massive, massive money-consuming system. And so we tell the voters, what are these children learning? What are they from all this? They're in that school most of the waking hours of the day. What are they learning? They're learning how to spend, borrow, and spend. When they go off to college, what message do they take to college? They have a massive pile of student loan debts. They have a massive pile of auto debts and credit card debts. Who's taught them this? Well, parents are primarily responsible to teach them how to manage their money. But when the school has them almost all the waking hours, the school's wasteful spending and wasteful facilities sets a very strong example to those children. By the time they get out of college, they're buried in debt. Student loan debts, we all know about it now. So we go in and say, let's help the school set better examples on how to be better stewards of our money. I can't come in and say I'm opposed to public education. I can't come in and say, let's close down the school, vote no. But we have a very strong message, which is let's set good examples on how to better manage your money. And with this, these kids will grow up and learn how to steward what they have and be more responsible with their money and so forth. So if you really want to fight for the children, if you really want to help these children, help them set a better example with money use, join us and vote no.
And it releases the voter, the property owner, the taxpayer, from a sense of guilt by not voting more. And of course, he's already pointed out the waste. Give us a couple of examples where they put a new building up and 10 years later they want to tear it down and build again. They go on and on. There's new elementary schools that go up in Nebraska, east side of Nebraska, and 3-4 years later the building is closed because not enough enrollment, or the district's in trouble.
I'm dealing with one right now. This was another public building, not a school, but another public building. It's 10 years old and they're closing it. And I deal with not just schools, but primarily schools. But the expenditures and the waste and the operating expenses, the utility bills, they promise all kinds of savings with new schools. Never happens. And I won't go into the details why, but there's a massive explosion in operating expenses when every one of these new buildings get put up. And so when we lift the guilt trip off of the voters' back, a lot of the elderly, in fact, there's even been studies out of Arizona State University that elderly people going in to vote in a school building go in intending to vote no, and 5% of them, because of the emotion and the memories of their own childhood in school, they flip their vote to a yes, which often is the margin of victory. So the emotional side of this has to be lifted off of their backs. And they realize, because a lot of these parents and grandparents go, you're talking about my grandkids. They're buried in student loans. They're buried in credit card debts and so forth. They don't even want to get married. They can't afford to get married. Oh, yeah, the school should help teach them how to better. You're right. I'm going to vote no. And that lifting of the guilt trip is why they to this day still hold workshops all over the upper Midwest as to do when I come along, because they squeal. I tell my clients, I just say straight up, if our narrative can't get them squealing, I'm doing something wrong. The minute they're squealing, then we know that we've opened up the belly of their political apparatchik, their whole system.
I want to talk about a few of the cases, but Paul is a dedicated Christian, homeschool dad, and has 11 children that he homeschooled. And he and Deborah have been married how many years now?
44 years, and our 27th grandchild has been born.
So he's a little behind me, and I'm behind him on the number of grandkids. We've been married 50 years and have 4 children, and he has 11. We homeschooled our kids. We were pioneers. Paul, when did you and Deborah start homeschooling your children?
Oh, Ray, you caught me by surprise. I think it was 1992, I believe. And we had a son who was in. Honestly, he was in a Christian school that we were discouraged with, and they were trying to look more and more like public schools. And we finally, no, it was 2 of them. We had two sons in the Christian school, and we pulled them out and started homeschooling, and never looked back. My wife, 3 or 4 years before our first child came along, my wife won a National Newspaper Association award, first place award for spot news writing. She is an excellent writer, and so some of my children are now strident political activists in the Second Amendment realm, and they're excellent writers, and they picked it up as children back when their mama, a national award-winning newspaper writer, taught them how to write.
I happen to know some of Paul's and Deborah's children personally, because I've gotten to know him and Deborah real well, but we've had some interaction with 3 or 4 of the children. And of course, they're adults now, but they're just wonderful kids. Very smart, shrewd, able, educated, and practical and godly. And he has done something that you don't see in many Christian families today. He's raised a group of warriors. These are soldiers. These children are adults now. How old is the oldest? 40-something?
He's turning 40 today. And I'm going to call in tonight and wish him happy birthday. But what we're starting to see is what we call covenantal continuity. I'm an old Reformed Presbyterian, but we're seeing this faith being passed on to the next generation. We're watching our grandkids getting raised up the same way, and we just go, okay, Lord, you can take us home. This is we're watching a whole another generation that's just picking up on this. Yeah. And honestly, a large part of our philosophy has to do with eschatology. We have an optimistic vision of what the power of the gospel will do to transform society.
Right.
And one key part of that that I learned 25 years ago from a gentleman by the name of R.J. Rushdoony, who I've employed it in these political realms, in all these political fights, which really makes them squeal again, is that the whole doctrine, the biblical doctrine of progressive sanctification, as man does away with, there's always the ongoing battle through all of life between our old nature and our new redeemed nature. But as time goes on, and we stumble and fall, but as time goes on, our redeemed nature grows in victory and grows in grace and grows in obedience. And as that happens to an individual heart and to a marriage and to a family and a home and a church and a community, there's progress. There's progress in faith. There's progress in obedience to God's law, and God starts to add his increase. Look at Deuteronomy 28, the first 15 verses. Obedience yields to progress. Well, in the late 18th century, late 18th century, the progressives, late 19th century, excuse me, the Unitarians in New England came out raised in this background of the hope and the progress in the gospel, and they understood it, but they rejected Christ. They left the faith. And so they co-opted, they stole from Christ's kingdom work this hope, this progress. And they adopted and they removed Christ from the foundation of progress and all the Christian social culture we had, social order, and they replaced it with the state. And the foundation, that was the state schools and state welfare and the juvenile court system. And the people that left the faith had offered the hope of progress by taking Christ out and adding the state and all of its institutions. So pretty soon, by the time Wilson came along, they were the progressives. They were the ones that had a vision of progress, and their vision of progress was more government, more state, more taxes, more everything, taking Christ out of it. When I understood that from a lecture from Rushdoony years ago, I prayed then. I said, Lord, if you give me an opportunity, I want to rip that vision back out of their hands. They stole it from us. It belongs to Christ's church, his bride. I'm taking it back. Now, I do it in the political realm. And so many of our committees, I explained this to our potential committees as we're getting organized. And I say, let's don't come out with a name called Taxpayers for Common Sense. You get marginalized and typecast, and everybody knows who you are. Come out with, like one we did recently, Rapid City Citizens for Progress. Vote no. And the community goes, what? If you're for progress, you're supposed to vote yes. You want more of this stuff. And we said, no, we have a different definition of progress. We think progress is the government learn how to manage their money. They should cut their expenses. They should steward the buildings they have. Progress doesn't mean more taxes and more government payroll incessantly. We have a different definition of progress. That's to help the middle class. And you should see people explode when they wake up and they go on to Facebook and social media and they start using these arguments. They're saying, no, progress is when you guys start diminishing in size. You go away. No more of your taxes, no more of your debts and bonds and so forth. Progress is in Christ. Progress is in honoring property rights as the Bible prescribes. Progress is restoring marriages and families. All of these things that the progressives, so-called, have been stealing from us. So I tell you what, I get a thrill every time we get to rip that back. They stole it from us. I get to rip it back and apply it into the community. And our own clients, their eyes will start to wake up and say, what? Wait a minute. You know, I get to watch people. When I give presentations, I get to see their eyes just light up and say, you're right. Christ is at the center of progress, not the state. And,
what's happened to Paul is over the years, he kind of has expanded his message. In some cases, he would come into a community, and remember, they're initially just concerned about their money, protecting their money and their property taxes. And sometimes he's a little bit of a radioactive with some people. And so in some cases, communities have found out that this guy's a homeschooler, and he's on record for actually exposing the public schools and trying to take them down. But they don't fire him. The committee wants him because they know he's good. He's a good, he's like a skillful surgeon. And so they keep him, and they attack him and the committee because they've hired this homeschooler. And lo and behold, it doesn't affect the campaign. Explain one of those cases.
There's nothing to explain, but this is just God's grace. I never saw this coming. I started off in this whole work, and I tried to lay low. I would even take pay at the end of the whole campaign so that my name wouldn't even surface on the campaign financial disclosure reports. It was all lawful, but I would do everything I could, but they figured out I was there. And so now, I didn't want my name out there, but now that's become the center of much of the proponent, the big government schools' whole campaign is to demonize me. And I do have some pretty strong views that I think that.
Well, that's why I like him.
And the radicalism needs to. We got to go back to the radii, which is Christ, and we need a radicalism that focuses people back to Christ. And in so doing, it's my clients have sat in amazement and watched this, but I said, just let them demonize us. They're waking up the community. Something is going on. And then as they demonize me and thus them by association, what happens is the whole community is all, who is this monster coming to attack our town? And then our literature comes out, and it's just full of the material that most voters want to see in the first place. I'm a former financial analyst. I know how to take down a CAFR's financial report of a public school of any size. In fact, I had fun a couple of years ago. I asked the Minnesota Department of Education if I could go to their summer workshop on learn better on the accounting systems of Minnesota public schools, and they fought me tooth and nail to keep me out, but they had no legal right, and they had to let me come. And I was, and the director of finance was at the registration desk, and they were thanking you, Mr. Dorr, for coming, and they all know what I'm doing there. I want to learn the very internal nature of their accounting system so I can use it to help close them down, and
right.
And so the more they demonize, the world's turning. The people are starting to say, you know what? There's more and more starting to say it's done. This transgenderism and all the rest of this stuff. And like you said, Ray, many of my clients first hire me for the financial side. By the time we get done, they say, this whole thing is it's gone. The Commission for Public Education, there's so much deception and lies and waste, and all they do is attack us, when in fact we've just exposed the whole community. And so by attacking me, they waken up the consciences, the hearts, and the minds of a lot more people and a whole lot more voters. And then when they see our stuff, it's like, oh, I'm not voting for this. Is this why they're attacking this guy? We haven't even seen him. They're attacking him because they don't want us to read this. And then it backfires on them. So this is God arranged it all. I never saw it coming. And
years ago, he was in a campaign in Illinois, and he told me this story, I think, while it was happening. I guess this is several years ago, but it was being funded by a printer who was really, really upset about the taxes on the schools.
You want me to tell it?
Yeah, go ahead. You tell it, because it's a funny story.
It really is funny, because the chairman of the committee heard about this printer who was willing to do some pro bono printing. We had to disclose it as an in-kind contribution, so he wasn't hiding it. But he called me up and says, call the owner of this print company. He's interested in helping out in the campaign. But now, Paul, he says, you got to keep your message about getting rid of the public schools out of this. Don't turn these people off. And I said, I'm no fool. I know what I'm doing. I said,
so he didn't want him to talk about homeschooling or anything like that. Just talk about taxes.
Yeah, just taxes. And 3 times before I hung up with the chairman of the committee, he reminded me, now, don't you talk about homeschooling and being done with the public schools and all the rest of that stuff. And I said, I won't, Eric. I won't. So I call the guy up. I introduce myself, the campaign strategy. I give him all the print specs, all the job specs, everything we need. Get all done. And he says, I'll do it. He said, my cost will be $2,300 for all the printing. He said, I'll bill it out at zero balance. I said, we'll take the invoice, put it as in-kind contribution. We'll show it. So he knew that the whole community would know. We're getting done. I'm thanking him profusely for his tremendous contribution.
And you had kept your promise to the chairman.
I never said a thing. And as we're hanging up, he says to me, you know what we really got to do to help get these public schools in our county turned around? I said, well, I got some ideas, but what's your thoughts? He said, close them. And I said, what? And he said, close them. I said, what do you mean? And he said, I'm seeing what they've done to Cook County up north of us in Chicago. He said, that's working its way down through Illinois. He said, I can't hire. This guy had several businesses, and he had a lot of people working for him. He said, I can't hire people anymore that have a work ethic, that have a desire, a drive, that can think on their own. They'll show up to work on a regular basis. He said, every one of them came to the public school system. I'm done. I used to believe in them. I loved them, supported them. He said, but it's that the average coming out of there is we're toast. We're not going to be able to continue these businesses and so forth. He said, just close them. And I said, oh, okay, well, Google my name when we hang up and check me out. And so we did. We hung up. I turned around, I called Eric back. I said, we got the job, Eric. He's going to throw in $2,400 or $500 worth of printing free of charge. And he said, okay. And he said, you didn't bring up the other stuff, did you? I said, no, I didn't. And he said, what do you mean? And he said, he brought it up. He said, it's time to close the public schools. What? You weren't going to talk about that. I said, Eric, I didn't bring it up. He did. And he went, really? And I said, yeah. I said, its charter is eviscerating in front of us. People recognize in the business community and everywhere else, it's done. And Ray, you've been on this before anybody, and but now we got numbers. You know it, I know it. We talk about it. We got numbers on the end of public education growing and exploding unlike we've ever seen before.
Yeah. Paul and I, for a while, were competing. I hope I can say this in a humorous way, for the most hated man in America by the public school establishment. But I think he has got me on it, because he's been really effective. I'm still struggling until recently to get people out, making my case. And all of a sudden, 3 weeks ago, everybody's out. What do you think of that, Paul? What does that mean?
Well, it's like we've been saying, the tide is turning, and that may lead into the ad campaign we're doing right now in Illinois.
Yeah, let's. I want to talk about that now.
Yeah,
great. This is a story of a tactic. That's a small tactic that's really working, and you can learn from it, audience.
If you guys can flip it up there, the next slide. I got a friend in Central Illinois, Charlie Stodden in Mattoon County, and he was a widower too soon, but they had 9 children. They homeschooled them all, a family business, and Charlie, early on, he's involved in agriculture and ag business, but early on I could tell that Charlie had the bigger picture. He could see education and money and the debt system and the fiat money and all of this. When they can see all of that, they become far better warriors. And then he had no fear of the system. And that's, if I have a biggest complaint about homeschoolers, we have to get over the fear of the system. I could tell you the stories of my own homeschooling legal case back in the mid-90s. When they fear you, when they fear the truth of God, and we're not afraid to bring it into the public square, I've seen them fold over and over. And Charlie Stodden has that same conviction. And so
wow.
he brought me in. He saw one of my ads in ag publication, brought me in. We fought and defeated a couple of bombs. We fought a couple more, and I think some of them got by. A sales tax provision got by a squeaker. But Charlie called me a week or two ago, a couple weeks ago, and said, we got to do something to optimize this. All these kids sitting at home with their parents. What do you think? He said, I'd like to have something like, don't send them back this fall, or something like that in an ad. What can we do? So I said, let me think about this. I put it together for him, and we turned it on. We used the old campaign page. It's a group page on Facebook. And this ad, that the viewers can see this, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this ad has been on for about 7 or 8 days right now in Coles County, Illinois. And I looked about an hour ago. They spent $34 on this ad. They've had 2,700 post reaches. They've had 175 engagements on it, includes 77 loves, including on the post and on the shares. They got 22 shares of this meme. And on their page, they have a contact name for a homeschool mom, a phone number, and an email address to get more information on homeschooling. And we have no hates. None of those angry emoticons. We got loves, likes, and shock or wows on this boost. And they've spent, and they didn't have a website for this work as far as starting homeschooling. So I said, let's just put Ray Moore's website on the bottom of it for now. And they know Ray and support his work and so forth. And that post clicks, we've had 267 clicks on that website going to Ray's site, off of $34. And,
wow, that's incredible.
And so
that county has got 53,000 people. The county seat is Charleston, Illinois.
Yep.
And so it's a small rural county.
In Charleston, I've been to the courthouse where Abraham Lincoln argued a case there as to why a white man should keep his black slave. Abraham Lincoln, the lawyer, argued in that court case. Anyway, a historical note. But anyway, so they haven't had many phone calls yet.
You disconnected. Sound is off.
That was my mistake. I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I hit my mute button by accident. Mm-hmm. A lot of people will take this, write down the contact information, and then in the coming weeks, as they sort out what's going on, they're going to very likely going to start calling. But we're getting a very positive response on this. I expected to see a bunch of hate emoticons and that sort of thing, and there's none. There's none. And I think if you see the ad, it says is every day at home getting a little sweeter? Are they starting to listen and obey better? We were kind of capturing the sentiment as to what's going on in these homes amongst these people, and with the mothers and their children, and that in fact we're hearing more and more reports of this. This is in fact what's going on. Hi, Gail.
She interrupted me and didn't mean to.
That's fine. That's fine. But anyway, so we're going to tweak this ad. We're going to narrow it down some and target more of the 25 to 50-year-old women. But we have a 68% women's response to this ad, 32% men, and it is stirring people to think. And the 22 shares in this small county. So this is one tactic. But I'm always, whenever I see government overreach and education destruction and so forth, I'm always thinking in terms of offense. We can't just whine and wring our hands and back up more and more. And that's why I was drawn to Ray years ago. He was out actively wanting to get people out. And one of his board members that he and I had that conversation 15, 20 years ago is get the kids out, take the money out. We fight levies. We fight opt-out levies and operating levies and so forth as well. And kids and the money and the future of this Unitarian Prussian experiment called public education is rapidly becoming up in the conscience of more and more people, starting to come up for grabs. They're starting to become a real question about the very viability of it. We're in the minorities yet. There's no doubt about it, but we're growing.
Now, why would I be interested in such a little thing as an ad like this? And we want to talk about the implications of this campaign. It happened in a small county in southern Illinois, a county of 53,000, and it was helping me understand the implications of what you did here. This is an experiment, and I'm of an opinion it can be done in 1,000 or 10,000 counties in the United States.
Yes, absolutely. And get a sense as you watch social networks in your community, get a sense of what these mamas are thinking and saying and doing. Even at your church, kind of get a feeling of, is it, well, I had to settle in. I'm out of work and my kids are here, and we might as well kind of settle in and figure this all out. And the thing that I think that these mothers are recognizing and why this is universal across the country is that they're away from school. They don't know when they're going back. In the summertime, you're out for a little bit. It's like a big recess, and then go back in the fall. Here, they don't know, and suddenly they're starting to see the prolonged time periods of their kids away from that whole peer influence. And they're starting to be a little softer, and they're starting to be a little sweeter, and they're starting to be a little more obedient. So, whatever the spirit is in your community, capture it. And then have local contacts, have local people ready to, with websites and links and so forth, to take them to, or local contacts. I mean, the Stoddens are getting ready to roll up to get 4 or 5 mothers at a time and bring them into their home and sit down with them and start walking them through. Experienced homeschool mothers, 2 brand new mamas looking at this, and so the sentiment is the same nationwide because of this silly COVID. The sentiment is everywhere. And so, I know people can do better graphics than I do. I'm 63 years old, but there's various ways of expressing this message. And I'd encourage everybody to get out there and just start pushing it every way they can.
We're going to send this ad around as much as we can, but I have a dream that several thousand families like the Stoddards could do it in other counties. It can be done. This is simple to do. And the other thing about it is a lot of people don't have discretionary funds for a big ad campaign. And I think, didn't they spend $6.30 on the first one, Paul? It was very cheap.
It was the first day or so. We're up to $34 so far on this ad, and it's got 2,700 post reaches, and it's got 175 connection or what do they call them? Interactions with it, and it's mostly loves and likes. Well, we got 22 shares, 22 people saw this, and we looked at some of the shares list. They don't know them. The Stoddens looked at it, they don't know them, but people are sharing it and pushing it around. And so far, this is $34. They're going to spend $50 on this one. Then we're going to tweak it and come back. It was experiment with some themes and try a different direction, and just keep building it. They can throw $50 every 10 days at this. So it's not hard to do. You got to learn a little about Facebook, setting up a group page. You got to go through the 2-week notice with Facebook to get certified and blah blah blah. But get it up and going. And
a lot of people already have the Facebook account. They could do it right now.
Right. That's exactly right. Yep.
And so this is simple stuff, and we don't need a $10,000 budget to run ads on a Christian radio station. Now, what does it tell you about where people might be, Paul? Now, we see how simple the ad is and that it worked, but does it tell you anything about the psychology of the community?
Yeah, it's why I gave you a heads up here about a week ago on this, Ray, because I expected to see a lot of negatives, a lot of people attacking and hitting and coming after this. I really did. We got none. We have zero. And that's telling me that the people in the system are starting to recognize their fight is starting to. It appears to be like their fight is becoming futile. We have a much more receptive audience from these numbers than I ever expected to see. And so I think the psychology is, if nothing else, we can appeal to parents to say, I can have sweeter children. They'll listen and obey more if I just keep them out of there. Is this part of the fruit of them being stuck at home from the public school? Wait a minute. You start getting these mothers and dads to start thinking about that. As I said to you on the phone a week or so ago, our target's not the doctrinaire, absolute feminist mother that could care less about her kids and the government's supposed to raise my kids, but our target is that middle-class Christian mother who goes to work every day feeling miserable. She knows she really shouldn't be. She'd like to find a way. She'd like to buck her peers and all the rest of them say, you got to have your career. You deserve this. It's the mother with the torn heart that we're targeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the ones this is starting to ring through to on now. They're starting to get it.
We see in a lot of trends now. I have a pastor friend in South Carolina. Actually, I'm going to be probably interviewing him in about a month, because the pastors are not, in many cases, not fulfilling their pastoral role to lead their flocks into Christian schooling or homeschooling, but this one does. And large church of about 3,000. I don't want to give the program away, but he teaches on homeschooling in the church, and they have about 600 children at the K-12 level being homeschooled. Almost all of them are, and there's very few public school families, and it's only because they're new members of the church. And so he publicly teaches, and he has a worldwide ministry. But since this pandemic has come, he's even gotten more aggressive outside the church. And he informed me today he has a live stream broadcast that's reached now on his program, his church, 47 states and 11 countries. And he's holding a special program on June 5th that'll be worldwide and probably has 10,000 of an audience already. And so we're going to promote it with the Christian Education Initiative. But he told me today, he said, I've noticed this. A lot of people thought they might be able to homeschool, but they just didn't feel they were competent to do it. They were uncomfortable, they were afraid, they were fearful, or things held them back. And now they're doing it, and they're comfortable with it. They like it, and many will keep on in the fall. So we really believe that we could see 10 million new homeschoolers. We just don't know what to expect. But this is a miracle. And Paul and I are strong believers that God works in history. He's sovereign over history, not just over our personal lives. And God did this. It was not an accident. It was not a coincidence. It was God in his grace and judgment. He caused this to happen, just like he forced the children of Israel to leave Egypt through a plague. So we're in a historic moment. Paul, you want to address that, and then I want to go to a couple other
Yeah,
questions.
the book of Judges is over and over God's chasing rod, and it follows up with mercy. God's chasing rod and following up with mercy. I think the judgment's still coming yet for a lot of what the Christian church. I heard a pastor in Milwaukee. It's a friend of Matt Trewella's, but a pastor in Milwaukee Sunday say he's going through. I forget the text, but that the Church of Jesus Christ is going to owe restitution to the living God for this nation that we've given over, that we've given up. And so, and I never thought of it that way before, but and a lot of pastors get offended when they hear that. But we had a charter. It was our calling and duty to be a witness to the world for the gospel of Christ and for His righteous standard of His law. And we have sat silent for so long. We've destroyed the souls of millions. We've let a corrupt government run completely amok, and we let them poison our children for generations. I went after the sex ed stuff back in the 80s, early 80s, and abstinence education's a fraud, the whole system, and the church just sat there. And so I think in the midst of the judgment, God's merciful hand is being held out over those who are humble and repentant, and recognize they need to turn back. And we don't know what little kids like this, what the generation that goes through this trying time and raised up in Christ and raised up in these homes and in Christian schools that are being faithful, we don't know what God can do with them in the coming generations.
I know that a lot of these kids are a different breed. Paul's an example of it. There are 11 children who I know about 4 of them, just very remarkable. Ordinary, normal young men and women, but they are warriors. Let's go back to Rollback Local Gov real quick, because I want people to be able to see that.
Yep. We've done about 90 of these campaigns in 9 states. We do primarily public school initiatives, but we also do anything to do with property rights. If you'll see one of my links on there, I have the immorality is our property taxes immoral. And since the Civil War, we've been inundated with property taxes. And so there's a lot of people, and everywhere I go, there's a lot of God-fearing, honest people who are just indignant that the government can come after they've worked my whole life to build up this business, this farm, to buy this home, pay for it, and they can still come and take it away if I object to the property taxes. So we have a common link under God's law. I get to tell humanists on these committees and libertarians who deny Christ, God's law says that the Federal Reserve is unjust. God's law says that property taxes are immoral. And they look at you like, really? They never heard of this before. Uh-huh. And then with that, we can design these strategies and campaigns in a way that appeals to the general public, but appeals to where, again, lists the guilt trip and then exposes in a massive scale. Local media has been hooked to the hip of government for so long that I tell my clients, let's just leave local media out of it. We want them to do letters to the editor and give us fair treatment and so forth. Government has been a source of revenue for local media for so long. There's no way they're going to participate. So we have to build our own communication system. We have to come up with some money. And the way people often say, who funds this? And I say, well, there's a certain class of commercial businesses and property owners who are not afraid of the public schools. And when you can show them what their tax bill is going to be if this thing passes, it's amazing what they'll do. And so, I'm going to be meeting the next night or two with a businessman who owns a large amount of very productive real estate, and he's looking at $25,000 a year in new taxes if this bond initiative that this is a county issue, it's not a school, but this county issue, extremely wasteful county issue. If it passes, he's looking at $25,000 a year for 25 years in new taxes. So there are people who will say, you know what, I'll write a check. I'll give you $2,000 or $3,000, like that printer in Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They'll do it because if I don't, I got a massive new liability on my books for the next 25 years. Yeah. So
what Paul has done is he's made this very practical, and you see the topics on the side of the page. These are things that you can click on, and you can see how it's done. A lot of Christians thought to have generally good ideas and have good sentiment, but they don't know how to beat their way out of a wet paper bag. They have no practical sense, and they don't really understand how things work. And Paul he's a former banker, a bank examiner, a businessman, but he is a dedicated Christian. He's got down into the weeds on this in a big way. We have about a few minutes left, and I wanted him to just divert from the topic completely and tell something that's going on in his community, but you're going to have to make it quick. And I want him to do this because we think the country is under judgment right now. God is not happy with this country, and we're going in for some hard times.
Yep. I'm in the middle, a 200-mile radius around me. Probably half of the pork production in America is produced. I'm a farm kid originally. I have family that owns farmland, and I have a lot of friends in pork and beef production. One of the largest pork plants in the country in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, closed down because of the coronavirus. Now we heard today that CDC is coming in. It's one of the top hotspots in America. I think most of it is I don't get into all of that. I think it's mostly a fear campaign. I had a great talk with a Reformed pastor down in Texas yesterday about we have to study the nature of propaganda and how people's fear is driven by these things. But so now they say they got this terrible coronavirus. It's owned by Smithfield Foods, which was out of Virginia. They got bought out by the Chinese. And this plant produces 4.5% of all the pork consumed in America. It's like 1,500 tons of finished pork products that head out the door every day. And it's closed down. And manufacturing has just-in-time inventory. Livestock production in this country has just-in-time inventory. From the moment a sow is bred in a farrowing barn, and those pigs are born, and they come into a starter building, and from there into a finishing building, they know down to the hour when that fat hog's going to end up at the packing plant and where it's going to go, what the cost margins are, the nutrition levels, everything. And right now, there are hundreds of barns full of big fat hogs, and there's no place to go with them. And it's not the supply of pork; it's the whole production food delivery system because of coronavirus. And I just heard yesterday that a lot of these plants are staffed by our Hispanic friends, and for a couple of weeks they were not paying any attention to this. And I'm told that Hispanic media, speaking media, in the last 10 days has opened up to this, and now they're all afraid to even come into work. And I got people inside this plant. A good friend who's got his good friends are inside middle management, and they're saying we haven't seen that many guys get sick. They get tested as being positive, but it's like their body immune system adapts and they go on, but because they tested positive, the fear factor is there, and we're seeing this in corn. The ethanol industry has collapsed. Bankers are nervous everywhere. Who do we finance? Who puts in a crop this year or not? A beef plant in central Iowa just closed a couple of days ago. And if we continue seeing, because there's no excess capacity that anybody knows of in these slaughterhouses, and so no one knows where these hogs and these beef are going to go, and how they're not going to go through a plant and get onto a freezer car and go to your grocery store. So. And there's huge questions. As a dear friend who knows Ray, as a pork producer in this area, said, he said, right now, he said, most of the guys you talk to are just in shock. They don't know what to do. And so he theorized they're going to have to shut it off back at the farrowing barns, at the breeding barns, and then let this system kind of sort itself out. Because right now, I mean, there's some guys literally talking, they may have to take these hogs out into open fields and take guns and shoot them and bury them in pits. Because they don't know what to do with them. And the financial side of this is indescribable. And as a former banker, the $2 trillion that the federal government put into the CARE package and the $4 trillion of the Federal Reserve is coming to devour what's left of your paychecks. Get yourselves prepared. The hyperinflation is coming at every level. Unlike it's been bad, it's going to get much worse. But our food supplies are going to be, they're in question. They're in real serious question right now.
What do you recommend? I mean, we're storing up some food, but we can't. There's going to be a shortage of beef and pork
in our little community. I'm going to write my elders here soon and say we should be looking at. We have some doctors and a lot of nurses in our church. We should supply a little medical facility if things start shutting down at the hospital. We should have community gardens. We should encourage people to store up canned goods and whatever they can for proteins. We should start having little neighborhood watches. We're going to go to the sheriff and ask him to get a deputy defense force. So we got more and more like the concealed carry permit holders and good honorable Christian men that would be deputized if need be, because the law enforcement community is nervous from everything I've heard and talked to, and so there's a whole aggressive plan that the church could do in their neighborhood, in their communities, and whatever, and they should task people to coordinate resources and skills back and forth. I didn't even look at coming up with a barter system, some sort of barter currency, something. I think we're heading into the 1930s. There were thousands of communities in America that had their own barter coins, just so that people could exchange a skill for a service, for a good, for a food, and lots of ways to think about there. But don't.
During the Depression, they had victory gardens. Even in the cities, everybody had their little garden.
Yep.
We're going to have to take care of ourselves, and we're getting. You said if this is not resolved in 2 or 3 weeks, there's going to be a shortage of pork in the.
That's everybody in the pork industry I'm talking to is saying we got about 2 weeks. This was 3 or 4 days ago. We got about 2 weeks, and they cannot keep feeding these hogs. There's a whole system coming in behind them. They have to get out. They have to move out. They can't afford to let them sit there, and they can't. And then they got smaller pigs coming in, so up behind. So within about in fact, one of these guys told me that the trucking company he uses to haul fat hogs to town into this plant, they haul like 150 loads of fat hogs a week. This week they did 50, 1/3 of what they normally haul. And so I had a really young man that was scheduled. He alone was going to do like 12 loads this week to Sioux Falls, and they canceled them all. So I'm not an expert on this. I was born and raised on a farm, but the guys I'm talking to are in the industry, and they're saying there's shock, and they're saying in a couple of weeks they don't know what the plants, when the plant's doors are closed, there's no pork coming out.
All right, Paul, let's put back up Rollback Local Gov one more time.
That's the website name. Yeah. My company's name is Copperhead Consulting.
Yeah, so this is the go-to website for if you're in a community. Now, this won't be for a while, but somebody wants to raise your taxes to pay for more schools. This is a man to hire. He's managed about 90 campaigns and won 80%. Nobody has a record like that. Normally, somebody like him would contest these bond referendums, and we'd be doing good if we won 20%. And even when he loses, it's very close. So he has got the formula to beat them. And he's the most feared man in the upper Midwest. And in some of the states, the NEA has a convention, and they have actually a seminar dealing with the Paul Dorr factor. He's well known in the enemy camp. And so anyway, he's a friend of mine, and we've been working together off and on for 15 years, and I have recommended him in a number of places. So we're so glad to have him. We got a couple of minutes still. Has anybody got a comment or a rebuttal?
Where will I see them if it comes up?
I'm not sure. This will be archived, Paul, after tonight. Is that right, Jared? And so you'll
just a kind of a final thought is that actually engage when Christians actually engage. And we do it on biblical principles with integrity and professionalism and courage. You'd be shocked at how many people come out of the woodwork and say, "Who are you? Where do you get this gospel? How have you done it? Why do you do this?" And it opens people's hearts and minds when Christians just start going on the offense for Christ's kingdom and be professional about it and have courage. I tell my clients all the time, I can say a lot of skill, a lot of communication, a lot of research, all kinds of stuff that's very, very professional, very high level stuff, but I can't sell courage. And I can help you with it. I'll take your hand. I'll guide you through it. But courage is the number one thing that comes from a deep love of Christ above all else. Where that courage is, that's a formula that God often blesses, and that's what we need.
Okay, for our audience, this will be posted. Usually takes Jared a few hours to get it up on the website, but it is archived, and you can go to christedu.org. Put that up real quick. christedu.org. This is our webpage, and it'll be posted here. And the little red button, Watch Live, is the program. And you can go and look at the old programs. And
Watch Live, you click on Watch Live, and you'll get into the old programs.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
Jared,
all right, yes. All right. So it's a new system, but we need you to, if you like the program, you can click on it and capture it and send it out to your list. And we find that sometimes our audience is not huge at the time we do it, but by the evening late, we have dozens of people come in, and then over the next couple of weeks, they come back and archive it. But this is an important tactic of how to win. And we've got one of the best men in the country today who knows how to win and who has won and 80% of his contests. And he's not a talker, but he's a doer. And he's integrated Christian principles of economics, finance, with theology and Christian education. And it's been a winning formula. Okay, we're at 6 o'clock, and I'm going to close in prayer. And thank you, Paul, for being here today.
Thank you, Ray, for the pioneering role you've played in all of this for all these years.
If any of you are interested in getting in contact with him personally and can't reach him for some reason, call me, because I end up talking to him on the phone several times a month. All right, let's pray. Father God, we thank you for your servant, Paul Dorr, and for the work of rollbacklocalgov.com and also Copperhead Consulting. We thank you for the initiative in Coles County, Illinois. And we pray that that would become a model for thousands of homeschool moms all across the nation to spend their little nickels and dimes in reaching out in their community. And we've already learned today that people are ready for this message. And we ask you to bless our country and bring about real repentance and use these judgments that are falling on us now with great blows to turn us, break us, and bring us to our knees in repentance, that you might bring about showers of blessing and mercy again, and we'll give you the thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. This is my story, and I'm sticking with it.